as the crow flies on the Vance Crow podcast.
Ask whatever you want.
All right.
Whatever you want. Okay.
Rick Fox, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Vance. Oh my gosh.
This is bizarre for us to be recording a conversation because you have been my longtime mentor, friend. We've even done some business together. And we're in strange times now that we can't get together and see one another in person. And so the first time we're ever doing a video call, we're recording it to publish. So welcome. And I'm excited to talk with you.
It's crazy. I've been watching your podcast all along. It's like, what am I doing on your show?
Well, you are an attorney, a businessman, an industrialist, and you have an insight into how the world works as far as trade and economics. And I have always enjoyed our conversations. I think they are among some of the best I ever get a chance to have. What do you think is going on with global markets right now? What's your impression of how things look in a week, in a month, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's what's scary. We have a large vendor. I won't mention the country, but their country got shut down, and we're bringing in about 20 container loads a month from them. And they say it's going to be a short-term shutdown, and this country is a big country, third world country, and I don't see them coming back up for a long time. I mean, if we can, if ours went from 2 weeks to now we're a month and a half through April. This country's going to be shut down for a long time. And luckily I have enough inventory on the ground I can get through. But thinking about all these countries that are having their supply chain shut down.
I think that one of the biggest issues about getting the supply chains shut down is most people really don't know the scale of how much we import. And I had a chance of working on a ship, and my ship was really small, but it would come into these ports in San Diego or San Francisco or Mexico, all up and down. And you see, I've been at the Panama Canal. There is so much cargo in the ocean that everything you're buying, like thousands and thousands and thousands of cars, but not just the cars, all the little gears and ratio and brakes and all these things, not to mention raw materials. Yeah. And when these things get stuttered, the fact that you turn them back on and you have demand does not mean that the supply will be there. And I don't think most people realize that because they've never really seen the way the supply chain works.
Well, two things. When Trump was increasing tariffs throughout all these countries, this country wasn't under the tariff list, but we were having trouble getting containers to keep up with our demand. And it was because everybody was rushing to get it out of this country before Trump put tariffs on this country. So, our thin line of where we go over what the supply is right there. So I can imagine countries that aren't able to get, or companies that aren't able to get their goods, when these countries do open up, everybody's going to be rushing to get the materials. So there's going to be a backlog there. When I place an order, it's probably 2 months before I get the goods in stock. And so that's a big lead time. So if they turn it on right now, I'm 2 months behind.
It strikes me, this is just a crazy idea. I don't know anything about the condition of shipyards now, but if you all of a sudden had a whole bunch of shipyards open, now is the time to get infrastructure built. Invest as much as you can, because when we go to import-export, that is going to be everything. How quick can we get ships in and then also get them back out filled with our stuff?
Okay, so what we're talking about is an increase of demand and a short-term supply curve that looks like this, because they can't move that quickly. So what's going to happen is prices are going up. So I don't think we've talked at all about two types of in the media about two types of inflation. That demand curve, that when this country opens up, man, people are going to be just rushing towards a limited worth of supply. We got backlogs. Like somebody joked on Facebook how it's going to take 6 months to get an appointment at the beauty shop for these women.
Oh, I never thought about that. Yeah.
I mean, every chair is going to be taken. I mean, these unibrows on these women are going to have to be plucked by somebody.
I mean, I bought a pair of clippers. I bought a pair of I'm preparing to shave all mine off.
I don't have much to do, but I do my own.
I mean, maybe with hairdressers, right? Because there's going to be a fear there's going to be a whole set of people that the way they kept inside was because they were afraid.
Yeah, I think masks are going to be a common attire for a long time when you're up close like that. But so there's that type of inflation I'm worried about. And then the other thing is the monetary inflation, where we're printing money and just throwing it out on the streets like crazy. I've applied for this PPP loan that they're doing, payroll protection program. Thousands and thousands of millions of companies maybe are doing it. One bank had a webinar. They had 2,000 of their customers on the webinar. Everybody is rushing to get this request for money in. So this money is just being printed. It's not backed up by growth in the economy or anything. And, that's classic hyperinflation policy, which we never would have done. And right now they're doing it for purposes of just keeping people alive, keeping people from panicking.
I have been very critical of this because I was talking about inflation 6 months before we ever had a $2 trillion addition to our money supply. I've always been worried about inflation. Why? What would you do? You have just locked away all of the workers and told them they must stay in their houses. That's house arrest as far as I'm concerned. We can't leave them there to starve. And so you do need some money to be getting out there. Now, I don't know how much of it was pork, but I would never have thought it'd be a good idea for the government to give people checks of money. But if you are absolutely mandated by how dangerous the disease is that people have to be locked in their houses, you got to give them something.
I mean, they're able to get out to go grocery shopping, right?
Yeah.
So, the scary thing is when you see Mnuchin and Trump talking about what they have to do, and these $6 trillion bills getting passed, they're not even talking about inflation.
Why do you say 6 trillion instead of 2 trillion? So I've heard both numbers bandied about. I don't know what it means.
I heard it was an up to 6 trillion. Don't take me as I've heard 6 trillion talked about. So I'm thinking there might be some kind of 6 trillion number, but right now they're at 2 trillion. They've done the first two, but I think they plan to go up further. Maybe they've authorized it, or I'm not an expert there, but I did hear them talk, the media talk about a $6 trillion package. But
so one of the things that I've heard people say, and I don't understand what they mean by this, but some people say, "Oh, I'm not worried about inflation right now. I'm worried about deflation." What is the core of that argument? Because I don't understand it. And is that also a concern?
Yeah, I think deflation is actually more dangerous than inflation, because deflation makes it, hey, it's great for consumers, but deflation, there aren't any producers who want to produce at that level. There's no money in it. Prices could go below what their cost.
What is deflation? Make the simple explanation of it.
Deflation is where prices are going down. So,
but isn't that because your money is more valuable? I mean, it means if the prices go down, it's because the dollars that you hold have more value than they had before. So if you have money in savings, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think deflation is based on the prices of goods sold. If the prices of goods keep going down because of less demand or lower costs, like oil and gas costs, there's inflation and deflation. Deflation somehow is worse. It's been a long time since I've talked about that, but the people that my financial advisors that know talk about deflation as more of a fearful thing. Inflation you can keep under control. Deflation, I'm not sure we have any levers for. And I think it affects the supply of goods.
And so, but you're concerned more about inflation. You think that there is going to be so much money in the system that things aren't, because this is a challenge, because you think about there's going to be a bunch of pent up demand, people needing things.
Yeah.
At the same time where there's dollars being injected. Do they balance out?
I talked to you last week that I'd like to get a bunch of smart people in the room and figure out all these variables that have different effects, because one scenario is we could have deflation. One scenario we could have inflation, maybe even hyperinflation. And what are the effects of those, and which way are we going? Because you could make an argument that it's deflationary. I mean, where the demand just isn't there. people are sitting at home. They're not buying. They're not consuming. They're not traveling.
Certainly that's going on with fuel. I mean, right now, fuel coming out of the ground, people are not driving. They're not flying in planes. Those are the big uses. The big use right now is probably agriculture coming up. That's about it.
Yeah. I mean, I joke around like this is Bernie Sanders' dream right now. I mean, the environment is being cleaned up. We're not driving as much. But my fear is that people get used to this. Companies get used to it, and they realize, you know what, man, Zoom is a great way to have these meetings. Why are we have all this expensive real estate? Why do we need to go back and have people in our offices? We spent all this time operating without it. And so now companies start letting go of some of their leases and real estate starts tumbling. That would cause deflation because now you got oversupply of real estate and undersupply of demand.
Well, there's definitely a concern about that because one, people are going to find out that there are some that thrive working at home and they figure out how to connect with other people and it's not that bad for them. So they're going to want to work from home. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of other people there. They say, we don't actually need you to come back. We realized how much more efficient we could be just by focusing in these areas. I think there's going to be layoffs because the corporations are going to say, we've got to bring our price down, and a big part of that's employment. So once the PPP wears off, I think there's going to be a lot of out of work people.
Yeah, and there's a continued fear about the virus. People aren't going to just whip off their masks and say, let's go party and let's cram into our old office spaces again. There are going to be people that are afraid. I mean, there are people that would rather give up their paycheck than show up in the office. People that you would never expect that would have two nickels drubbed together, and they're like, I'm not coming in. Well, so what are you doing? What are you doing for food? And then
because there are people that are out working, right? Like I had some stuff delivered the other day and it was heavy and there were two dudes and they showed up and they, got the thing off the truck and brought it down to my house. Like people are still working. And if they weren't working, then I'd be having to take a lot more risk. I'd be going to a lot more stores because right now I can have basically everything brought to me.
How about our food insecurity, man, the food chain? I mean, let's say this disease is pretty mild, right? It's got a 1-2% death rate. A lot of people that have it don't know they have it or mild symptoms. What if it was smallpox? Or what if it was a disease that had a really high death rate? You wouldn't get people to stock the grocery store shelves. I mean, what do we do? I mean, this has really exposed a lot of weaknesses. I mean,
stocking the shelves is only one component of it because a lot of that actually could be automated up until the last, picking the things off the shelves, right? But a bigger part of it right now, people don't realize if coronavirus spreads into the countryside, farmers don't have a plan B, right? Like you've got maybe your dad could step in and do some of it for you or your neighbor. But if you have a big outbreak in these communities, you're talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of acres not getting planted with just a small outbreak, just a few people.
Right.
And right now we are grain secure. Everybody could feel very confident we got all the grain we need. But you're really talking about, do you have supply chain hiccups? Like we were talking about importing things from China or from Africa or even from Canada to be able to get the right fertilizers and pesticides and fungicides in. If there's a hiccup there, then 2021 starts looking not so good. And that has been our major export is agriculture that's kept us floated and connected with the rest of the world. And we sell it to them for a profit and they buy it because if they don't buy it, they don't have food.
Mm-hmm. So, I think when this whole thing is over, and it will be over, I think it's like a pre 9/11 and post 9/11. The world is never going to be the same. And when our president talks about, we need to bring manufacturing back, and nobody understood that. And when he said we're going to bring back steel because we need it for our national security, it's like, it's a joke. We don't need national security. What? We need to build ships with it. Yeah. Now we see how important manufacturing domestically is to our supply chain, our ability to grow food, to have medicine, have ventilators, you got one key component in a ventilator that's made overseas, and you don't have a ventilator.
And that's why the agriculture thing is amazing, because one of the things that's shown is that we can feed ourselves. Like we are we are going to figure it out. Now, we may have hiccups, but there are other countries, they're not going to be able to when this stuff hits. But as you say, the manufacturing, there's going to be a change. And the thing that I think might be interesting to hear from you is cities are going to be where people move to go back to manufacturing. So what would you be telling a city mayor or a county executive to say, these are the changes you can make to the laws right now that will make it as enticing as possible for people to do manufacturing here, so that our people that can do that level of work get jobs here?
You mean in the city or just in the U.S.?
I mean, where you and I live, we both live in the St. Louis metro area, but really any city. What is the advice that they should be taking to know this is how it makes it easy for an industrialist to do business here? Reduced regulation. I mean, that for one. You gotta let entrepreneurs and business do what they do best. What's the regulation holding them back right now?
Well, so in the oil and gas industry, look at California. The only companies in the oil and gas industry that operate in California are the majors, the Exxons, the Shells, all those. The small mom and pops, and there's tens of thousands of small mom and pop oil and gas companies. They don't have the infrastructure to do all the paperwork, regulations, filings, and it takes a lot of work, a lot of expense to drill an oil in California. And so that sort of thing versus, I don't know. Luckily, regulation really hasn't affected my business much in the past. But that's businesses want to do what we do best, and that's make a profit by making something that people demand, and everyone is benefited.
You know what I would like to see done, and I keep going back to agriculture because it's the thing that I know about. But there is so much demand for beef right now. But if I try and go to the store and I buy as much beef as I want to buy, the guy behind me is going to be really upset, right? He's going to be like, why did you just buy out all of the beef here? We all are just taking what we can eat right now. So there should be a way to be able to just go out and buy a cow and have it delivered to my house. And you can do that, but there's not that many options. And one of the reasons is it is really hard to legally butcher and distribute the meat from an animal. You got to do it through a packing plan. It needs to have all of this paperwork and certification. The butchers in the United States, they can butcher without having somebody stand over their shoulder and stamp something.
Right.
You need to take care. The people they have inside their companies, they do care about sanitary conditions and making it right. Let's just open it up and let them know that if you really screw up, you're going to pay for it. But if you don't screw up, people are getting beef. We got to get it butchered.
Right. Well, it's like the environmental regulations when the Clean Water Act got slashed, and all these talking points that Trump has ruined our water, ruined our air. When things get, you can make that emotional argument, but in reality, what it means is some farmer's little pond is not going to be hit hard with environmental regulations, because it affects the groundwater, and you can make anything sound good, but in reality, it's just a BS way to regulate. It's not all or nothing.
It's not all or nothing is right. And we've done so much centralization of the rules where we've put them up at the top, the national government. Whereas in reality, we are in a republic. We're in a federalist, system where the more local control you have, the more those cities can respond to the situation on the ground. And outside of whatever Trump's been saying, I mean, in my opinion, the things he does on the stage at the White House is nothing more than theater. Very well elaborated. It's a play. He's got different actors and actresses. They're genuinely doing their work, but it's just theater up there. But I do think the point of letting people get work done, using the private sector to do what they know how to do, that has been a very sharp idea.
You know what I love is that he mentions company names up there, because that's just invaluable advertising, like the Pillow Guy and 3M, and And when General Motors, when he had to use the Defense Act against General Motors, I can imagine the PR department and General Motors, how they responded to that. That they had to use the Defense Act to get them to produce ventilators involuntarily when we have all of our hospitals screaming for ventilators. So Trump knows how to use business and entrepreneurship to get the most out of companies, and that's speak well about them.
Yes. Okay. I'm totally with you on that he's very clever and he has figured out how to thread the needle so that he gets what he wants. He really hits the tumblers on the lock. But I will also say this. I watched what I think was a shameful thing go on Fox News with regards to 3M. They had the CEO on there and they were demanding why, if he had any kind of production going to another country, that he should have to bring that back to the U.S. and there should be no questions asked. We live in a democracy. People have lived in a capitalist system. Those people had masks promised to them. You're trying to point a gun at a guy and say he has to do this. Other people are going to die. And I think that that's the worst part of humanity when we start pulling out the laws like the Defense Act, because I think it's too much force.
I totally agree. And Trump's gotten a lot of criticism from the left that he hasn't used it more. You know, the left would go in there and just take over control of everything and say, you're going to make this product, you're going to make this product. And Trump, you know, he invoked it, but he didn't use it for a long time. And he always said, you know, it's a lot of power. You know, companies are going to be doing fine. They're going to step up. They're going to do what they need to do. And it kind of caught me in like, ooh, this is what it really means to be a states' rights person. You know, to say, you know, you have this power, but you don't have to use it. We're in a democracy. We have freedom. You know, there's other forces at play to cause a company to want to supply domestically. You know, you can call them out on it. And all of a sudden their name gets blacklisted.
And then maybe they get a chance to say, hey, there's got to be somebody that's making drivetrains for all the ambulances that we're trying to build, and switching us over to ventilators. Maybe, you know, central command of these things is not a good idea. I mean, I guess I'm more bold talking with you than I am with a lot of other people because you and I have known each other for a very long time. But I have been continued to be very concerned about the willingness to use force over this. Yeah. And I put something up on Twitter to see what people's responses were about how long do you think the government will go before they use force to arrest somebody that's not following the stay-at-home order? And people thought, you know, it's not going to be in the next couple of days. It's not going to be in the next couple of weeks. Will it be in the first couple of months? And then it was never. They won't. And almost everybody chose never. And it's like, yeah, but you just gave them that power. They didn't ask for that power, take that power because they weren't going to use it. They took it because they wanted it.
Right. Did you in New York just up their fine to $1,000?
If what?
If you're caught outside when you're not supposed to, you know, if you're not going to one of these assigned places, you know, groceries, doctor's appointment, $1,000 fine.
Well, you could make $1 million driving on I-64 from somewhere outside of the city into the city. There are more than 1 million people running around right now. While we're at stay at home, that's ridiculous because and I don't think there should be force to be used. We need to keep things moving, but there would be millions of dollars coming your way. Right.
You know, it's funny. I looked at the Missouri law that came out, or his letter, and you look at the permitted activities versus the non-permitted. Nothing's changed. I mean, the only thing that's changed is the parking lot on the levee is closed, so you can't park your car there to ride your bike on it. But, you know, you can go to the grocery store. So if you get stopped by a cop, I'm going to the grocery store, permitted use. Doctor's appointment, work, drugstore. I mean, so every one of those cars going by me on Highway 40, they can just say they're going to the grocery store. But what they don't want you to do is be walking in the park or having parties outside.
So here comes a question about how far does that force go? Because I've had my view taken both ways on this. When they said you are not allowed to go to church And if you see somebody going to church, call this number. So we're asking our citizens to report on one another. And I said I thought that was a violation of the First Amendment because people have a right to assemble, particularly in their houses of worship. Now, the pushback I got, which is reasonable, you have to be able to answer this, which is, well, what about the nurses that will be impacted by the number of people that get sick because of these people gathering? And if it's a deadly disease, that's something serious. But I get to thinking about it, and almost every other choice that gets a person into the hospital comes from some personal choice that they took.
Mm-hmm. What about Albany, Georgia? You hear about that little hotspot?
No.
Oh, this little black church down there. It's where I go quail hunting. It's a great, wonderful place. It was early on. There was a funeral, so all the family members and friends come in, and they're crying and they're sniffling and they're blowing their nose and they're hugging and kissing each other. Well, there was one person there, contaminated that whole church community, and that started a major hotspot. That's one of the biggest hotspots in the country right now, Albany, Georgia. So that's what they're afraid of. One church group that gets a little bit too close and friendly, not just affects them, but then they go out and they become super spreaders. So, it's a balance. It's like, hey, you can go out, you can have church services, but we don't want you more than 10 people and 6 feet apart. Have 10 groups of 10, go in the parking lot and just spread on out. But having everybody side by side in chairs in the pew, that's going to affect us. It's going to affect the curve. It's going to affect how long we're out of business.
Yeah, that's true. And you have laws to get people to cooperate so that you can have a civil society. And sometimes those things are things you want to be doing. It's a question with civil liberties. Like, are there any laws that you can't invoke? Are there any things you can't do?
It's like we got the right under the Constitution to peacefully demonstrate. But you know what? During a presidential election, they will tell you where you're going to have to stand to demonstrate, right? So they can limit this space and time, but
so what
there are
do you
limitations on all freedoms.
Will people eventually have demonstrations that violate the stay-at-home orders, or will the government release those before the people need to demand them?
I mean, most people don't want to be that close. I mean, so most of the country is, without being told what to do, they're not going to be doing that stuff. But there's some crazy people that are, and they affect everybody. So I think if it's
crazy people and desperate people that are put in a situation where they feel like they have to.
Like, give me an example.
Well, if you felt like you didn't have enough money to be able to feed your family, or you weren't getting the types of, you were locked in an apartment and had no way to get out, or you're a landowner and so many people have stopped paying rent that you can't do anything at all about it.
Yeah. I mean, even in Missouri, one of the exceptions is you can go out and says you can hike, you can fish, you can hunt, you can exercise, you can go outside and do all that stuff. But that mass tight groups of people, I think that is something of the past for a while. Okay. And if somebody does do it, I think you could put some limits on that.
Up to the point of putting people in jail?
At least fining them if they get 50 people together in a small, tight room to do a, Easter service next Sunday, or 100 people. It does cross a lot of sensitive barriers. I mean, religion and everything else, but it gets to the point where it's reckless and endangers not only you, but the entire society. And we saw that in Albany, Georgia, at a funeral. And we see what that does. That their system's already taxed from that one little funeral. So to some degree, you got to say, look, have your service, but do it in groups of 10, spread out, different places, do it online.
So maybe one thing that would make me more comfortable with this would be is before we take that right away, we describe the parameters under which those rights come back. And when I say rights, I know that rights are not real. They're completely constructed by us. But I'm saying, like, these ones that we've been under for the first, couple hundred years of our civilization, they've proven to be really valuable and they keep other bad things from happening. So if we're going to suspend it, what are the conditions under which we bring it back, and we bring it back automatically. So somebody can't stand in the way of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we already tell establishments how many people they can have in a room, right? Occupancy limits, capacity. So, or how many doors need to be open. Like in New York, there's the Triangle Shirt Factory fire. Have you heard about that? It's right down there in New York City by Washington Square Park by NYU. It's the site of the biggest factory fire. And all these, women, they were Jewish women because those were Jewish immigrants that were just, tailored clothing makers. They were jumping out windows, and many, many, people died. And that was the start of like OSHA type regulations in factories about number of doors and exits and fire alarms and sprinklers and everything like that. So why couldn't we, under that same premise of public safety, control how many people can pray in a church or synagogue and the density of that population? And I don't know.
I mean, that's a fair point. One might also say that there's no business owner after a fire like that would want to be in a building that had doors like that had a situation like that, because before that moment, they just didn't realize what could happen. Just like this pandemic, people have been telling us for years and years and years that this could happen. We didn't prepare for it. And so therefore, next time, we're going to be a lot more ready and prepared for it.
Yeah. Think about those survivalists that are up in Utah and Montana, with shipping containers buried underground filled with food
I know
and
them.
ammo.
I know them.
That's right now. They're not so crazy.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I just heard it from a friend that was saying he lives down in the Stanford area of San Francisco. And he said a couple of his friends decided that they were going to go up to their second house in Tahoe. Now, this is on the California side, so it's not actually going in and crossing state boundaries. And they were sent letters. If you are a property owner up here and this is your second home and you haven't been up here, then don't expect to come here because we're checking the highways. Now, whether they actually are or not, who knows? Could just be a person that wants to make it clear you're not welcome here, or it could be that they're doing it. I don't know, but there are a lot of weird things going on right now, and people taking security into their own hands.
What about Texas on an interstate highway, stopping cars and making sure that they're not just fleeing from Louisiana, which is a hotspot, into Texas? Have you heard this?
I hadn't heard that.
Oh, they're asking people to prove to them where they're going to stay for the 14 days that you're going to be quarantined.
I did hear that, yeah.
And if not, they're not letting them in the state. Now that's tough. That is on an interstate highway, a state patrolman telling you can't travel into another state.
In the United States.
Or state,
that's right.
In the United States. Yeah.
Can you imagine being in Illinois and coming back and having somebody be like, you can't come in this border?
Okay. The other thing that is scary is at what point do we get where if our food stops, right? Grocery stores are empty. What do people do? When do they start going crazy? When do they start committing crimes and stealing? And
I think that's why the things we've been talking about so much about deregulation is so important. So earlier in this podcast, one of the very first interviews I did was with a guy that was a trucker. And he was talking about how, in reality, right now is the best trucking has ever been. They got rid of a whole bunch of rules that were designed around making it possible so that the people in the cars and the people in the trucks didn't get in too many problems. And eventually that regulation became pretty onerous to the degree where they couldn't really make the kind of money that they were making before. Well, now there's no cars on the interstate, or very, very few, and you're flipping the trucks on. So he is hauling all over the place and getting things done. And I do think that we have that going for us in our system, is that our vascular system inside of the country is strong. I'm not saying it's impenetrable. And I do think people should be mindful of what could happen, because a lot of things can happen in the middle of something as chaotic as this, but we are pretty strong. I wouldn't want to sow panic in this thing.
Yeah. And until they feel fearful, right? Right now, the disease in a truck, you feel isolated, you're socially isolated. You don't feel fearful. You can show up at our dock and pick up goods and never get out of your truck. But at the point that they are fearful. That's when it could get serious. I guess during Chernobyl, the Russians found people that were willing to go in there and throw the radioactive rods back into the reactor. At what point does the government force people to do jobs that they don't want to do? That's a scary thought.
I mean, the benefit of the virus right now is it doesn't mean certain death. In fact, it's very, very low likelihood. Right. So the thing that you're talking about here is really the fear of coming in contact with something that may get you and may not. But the chances that it gets you are pretty low.
I mean, the next pandemic, that what if it's worse? So from here, post coronavirus, are we all start stocking non-perishable goods? Are we stocking cash? Are we growing our own gardens?
How much did you have to change your behavior to be ready for what's going on right now? You're coming back from New York. Did you guys go stock up? Did you have a toilet paper problem?
It started in New York when you kind of walk through the grocery stores and you walk slow. And when you reach for something, you'd reach just for one because you feel like if you run or grab a bunch, you're going to start a panic, right? So no, we didn't panic. We didn't do any of that stuff. But after, when the bird flu, remember the bird flu?
Yeah.
20 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
That was like 40% deadly. I had seen a documentary about that, like a mockumentary, where they kind of pretended the first guy gets on a plane and then you see all the dots expand. And at that point, we started stocking food and cash, and our boys were enrolled in a bird flu vaccine study, and I was alerted to that. I was nervous, and that's why I'm surprised that I took this so lightly, because I knew what's happening now is what I feared would happen during the bird flu, and I didn't get back in the same mindset for this. It kind of caught me off guard.
Okay, so you said something kind of mind-bendy there, that you had your kids in a vaccine study. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think is the amount of time a vaccine should be studied for in smaller populations before you make it widely available? And then ultimately, do you make it mandatory in the same way that smallpox and measles and...
Yeah. Okay, so we talked to our pediatrician before we enrolled them. It was a St. Lucie program. And she says, absolutely. She goes, you can do it. She goes, I do it with my own kids. She goes, vaccines are completely safe. They're a dead version of the virus. And there's nothing that's growing, it's dead. It cannot hurt you. So her opinion was absolutely, there's zero risk of doing it. So then they would give them, they take their blood, they give them a shot, they space it out weeks or months apart. And they just see how long it takes for your body to build up the antibodies to a certain level, and then how long you keep it. So I don't know if it's a time versus, I've never heard of a vaccine, except for these non-vaccine crazes going on, that a vaccine can go bad. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know. I know there are people that are very nervous about vaccines in general, and I have never felt any problem going. I go get the flu vaccine every year. In fact, it was actually late January that I went and got my flu vaccine, even though I didn't think coronavirus was a problem. I watched a guy on YouTube that said, hey, if you want to get ready for coronavirus, there's nothing you can do. Why don't you go get your flu vaccine so you make sure you don't get the flu too? And I was like, you know what? That's a good idea. I can agree with that.
I just got the pneumonia vaccine last week.
I didn't realize there was a pneumonia vaccine.
Yeah. Walgreens has it advertised. So you got to be like 60 or 65 to get it. I was able to get a prescription from my doctor. I'm 57, almost 58. But I'm thinking, I have like environmentally induced asthma at times, so I know what it's like to be short of breath. Anything I can do to keep me from getting asthma, I'm going to do. Now, I've read where it's not going to help you with coronavirus, but it can't hurt, is my attitude.
Well, I mean, the other thing is you don't want to go to the hospital for another thing. I just yesterday interviewed a guy that is a journalist over in Germany, in Berlin. He had an embolism in his lung, and so he had to go to the hospital. And once he went to the hospital, then they were like, well, it might be coronavirus, so we're going to test you. The test results didn't come back for 7 days. So imagine sitting in a hospital waiting to find out whether or not you have coronavirus, and the people in the hallways, they have it.
Right. Right.
He was
Right.
quite comfortable with it, but I got to say, I have enough fear of it that I would have had trouble sleeping if that was that close to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got some yard work I'm supposed to do involving chainsaws. And Karen and I both said, don't do it. It's not worth having an accident that you might have to go to the hospital for.
I'm exactly in that same way.
I actually, probably about 2 weeks ago, I cut my finger when I was getting ready to make dinner, sharpening a knife, and I had to go in and get stitches. I went to the Chesterfield urgent care, and luckily I was the only patient in the place at the time.
Wow. I mean, there are things that you need to be able to go. And as far as I know, where we're at on April 7th of 2020, we don't have to worry about going into an urgent care. Like, we are okay to go in there. So, I mean, I think it's good to have a healthy fear. My wife and I are in total isolation. We've not come into contact with anybody outside of us. And that's because with her being pregnant, I just don't want to, I don't want to run that risk.
Right.
Well, Rick, this has been a fantastic conversation. There was one question that I wanted to ask you before we get done, and then I've got my question that I ask everybody. But you think about economics in a very different way than most people. So I'm curious to hear, if people go into the financial position that they can't pay their rent, and the government says, don't worry about not paying your rent right now, try and work something out, and they don't do it for 1 month or 2 months. How long does this go on before it becomes a major problem, and how does this get resolved? There are people that have barely enough money to pay their rent as it is, let alone pay back rent, things like that. How's all this going to fall through the chain?
Hey, I'm talking to friends now who are landlords on these buildings, and it's already a problem. Like 40% of the people in buildings are not paying rent. Then you ask, does it go downhill? Can the bank that's financing the building for the landlord foreclose on the building? So they'll probably have some leeway. And then the bank, who's paying interest on the money that they've got from their depositors, it's like, where does it end? So I think when we're back up and running, people will be able to evict again. But this is just unprecedented times. It's like no aspect of society and business and life has been unaffected by this. And 9/11 was such an isolated incident at a specific moment. This every day it's happening. And you look at the people that should know, and I don't even think, not only don't they know what's going on, what's going to happen in the future, they're trying to figure out what to do today. And that's the scary part.
And for the people that know there's nobody coming to save them, and they don't have a bunch of other options because the option they had was the best one they knew how to get, this is a scary time.
And the only consolation is that the entire world is going through it. It's not like just an American thing. So, the world is in this together. So, you got to pray that we got good leaders that know what to do.
And if you don't, then become a good leader yourself. So here's my final question. It's April 7th, 2020. What does the world look like 2 weeks from today?
Well, we're still in shutdown. I've got good faith, good hopes for these treatment drugs like the hydrochloroquine, chloroquine, and the zinc and the Z-Pak.
I have a buddy that did a video that goes by Chubby Emu on YouTube. He's a medical doctor and a mechanical engineer. He made a video about that hydrochloroquine and why it's got some hope, but the study that was used to make it say that it was valuable is not good. It's worth watching because it will give you a more nuanced view than what you're seeing on CBS or CNN or whatever.
So it kind of reminds me, after 9/11, I remember laying in bed thinking, I don't know the answer to this. How do we fly again safely? How do we prevent people? And then you realize, smart people, we're not static. So they came up with the door to get in the pilot's thing, in the cockpit. The people on board, like the plane that crashed in the countryside, right? The let's roll people. That's the first time they stepped up to fight back. So my point is, with this, we're not just watching a static movie. Companies and people are trying to change it right now. Every company in the world is coming up with if they can, the vaccines or treatments. So luckily, because of capitalism primarily, the profit motive is so high that the first one to come up with a cure or a good treatment for this is going to win big. So as we're sitting here talking, there are companies out there just scrambling to find the answer to this question. Israel's supposed to have a vaccine in 2 weeks. I don't know what that means, but that was the headline on the article from a reputable website. But that's just one company. So, we're going to bend this curve somehow, and it's going to be done with very smart companies and people and scientists. And it's what we don't know that we don't know that's going to save us, probably.
Wow, that was a great way to wrap up. So in 2 weeks, we'll know a lot more of what we don't know right now.
Yeah.
So thanks, Rick, and we'll be safe and tell your family I said hi.
Okay, thanks.